The outlaw was healed by a healer, but that night he discovered the secret she was hiding. The creak of the stagecoach echoed along the dusty road as Charlotte Wilson clutched her diary tightly to her chest. The sudden movement of the vehicle made her brown hair slip out of its neat bun, an apt metaphor for how her organized life in Boston was about to be completely transformed in Thunder Valley, Wyoming. "One more hour, miss," informed the coachman, a middle-aged man with a graying mustache who had introduced himself as Mr. Miller. "The snow is coming early this year." Charlotte watched the sky through the small window. Dark clouds were gathering on the horizon, contrasting with the vast golden plains of Wyoming. Her fiancé, Maxwell Henderson, the mayor of Thunder Valley, had guaranteed that October would be a mild month for their arrival. Clearly, nature had other plans. The 22-year-old teacher adjusted her lace gloves, a farewell gift from her mother. The arranged marriage to Maxwell had been a practical decision. He needed a respectable wife to strengthen his political position, and the Wilson family needed the financial security the union would provide after the death of Charlotte's father. The stagecoach passed a group of Cheyenne natives riding in the opposite direction. Among them, one warrior in particular caught Charlotte's eye. Mounted on a magnificent black horse, his bearing was majestic, and even from a distance, she could feel the intensity of his gaze. An eagle feather adorned his long black hair, and his traditional robes contrasted with the increasingly gray scenery. "That's Thundercloud," commented Miller, noticing his passenger's interest. "Chief of the Cheyenne in this region. Unlike the others, he's reached a peace agreement with the city. But not everyone is happy about it." Charlotte nodded, trying to ignore the cold that was beginning to intensify. Her Boston upbringing had done little to prepare her for the complexities of the West. Maxwell's letters always emphasized the progress and civilization he was bringing to Thunder Valley, but rarely mentioned the Native Americans except as a problem to be managed. The snow began to fall when they saw the first buildings in Thunder Valley. The town was larger than Charlotte had imagined, with a main street lined with stores, a two-story hotel, and a church whose bells shone even under the cloudy sky. The school where she would be teaching was at the end of the street, a modest wooden building with its own small bell. "Miss Wilson," Maxwell Henderson's deep voice rang out as soon as the coach stopped. Tall and well-dressed, with a dark suit and a gold watch in his pocket, he was the personification of authority. His smile, though cordial, didn't reach his ice-blue eyes. "Mr. Henderson," Charlotte replied, accepting his hand to get out of the vehicle. The biting wind made her traveling dress flutter, and the first flakes of snow were already beginning to accumulate on her shoulders. "Welcome to Thunder Valley," said Maxwell, his tone formal even in front of his fiancée. "Mrs. Crawford has prepared your quarters at the boarding house. Tomorrow we can discuss the wedding arrangements." Before Charlotte could reply, shouts from down the street interrupted the conversation. A group of men were approaching, led by Warren Blackburn, the owner of the largest ranch in the area. "Henderson," shouted Blackburn, his face red with rage. "Those savages have stolen 3 more of my calves. Your peace agreement is worthless." Maxwell stiffened, instinctively positioning himself between Charlotte and the enraged men. "Mr. Blackburn, these accusations are serious. We must investigate properly." "Investigate," Blackburn spat on the ground. "While you investigate, that Thundercloud and his people keep stealing from us. If you don't take action, we will." The tension was palpable in the main street. Other residents began to gather, some clearly supporting Blackburn, others keeping a cautious distance. Charlotte watched everything with a mixture of fascination and apprehension, realizing that Thunder Valley was much more complex than Maxwell's letters had suggested. "The law will be upheld," Maxwell declared firmly, "by everyone." His stern gaze swept the crowd before turning to Charlotte. "Mrs. Crawford, please escort Miss Wilson to the boarding house. The weather is getting worse." A stout lady with gray hair tied up in a bun appeared at Charlotte's side, gently guiding her away from the commotion. As they walked, Charlotte looked back one last time, seeing Maxwell in a heated argument with Blackburn and his men. "Don't worry, dear," said Mrs. Crawford, noticing her unease. "Thunder Valley may seem rustic now, but it's a place of opportunity. Just keep your eyes open and your heart guarded." That night, lying in her new bed at the boarding house, Charlotte listened to the wind howl and thought of the Cheyenne warriors she had seen on the road. There was something in his gaze that disturbed her, not fear or dread, but an ancient wisdom that seemed to defy everything she knew. In her diary, she wrote, "Thunder Valley is not just a new town, it's a new world with a civilization I know collides with forces I barely understand." Maxwell represents order in progress, but there is something else here, something deeper that the icy wind seems to want to show me. For the first time in my life, I question whether the path I have chosen is really the only one possible. The snow continued to fall, covering Thunder Valley with a blanket of white that seemed to want to hide the conflicts boiling beneath its surface. Charlotte fell asleep to the distant sound of Indian drums, her sleep populated by dreams of black horses and eagle feathers dancing in the wind. Charlotte's first week in Thunder Valley had been a whirlwind of adjustment. Mornings were dedicated to school, where 15 children of different ages watched her curiously as she tried to establish a study routine similar to the one she had known in Boston. Afternoons were consumed by meetings with Maxwell and the local seamstress, planning a wedding that seemed ever closer and at the same time strangely distant. On Saturday, ignoring Mrs. Crawford's warnings about a possible blizzard, Charlotte decided to ride to the creek to collect samples of local plants. Her interest in botany, considered eccentric by Boston society, found Wyoming to be an uncharted territory of fascinating species. Miss Wilson Maxwell questioned her when she was already mounted on her tame mare. "It's not wise to venture out alone. The latest developments with Blackburn's cattle." "I'll be fine," she interrupted him with a polite smile. "I know the way to the creek, and I promise to return before nightfall." Maxwell hesitated, his tense jaw revealing disapproval. "At least take this," he said, handing him a small revolver. "Just in case." Charlotte reluctantly accepted the gun, stowing it in her leather bag along with her notebook. As she drove away from the city, she felt the weight of Maxwell's gaze on her back, like a constant reminder of the expectations weighing on her shoulders. The sky, initially clear, began to darken when she reached the stream. Charlotte dismounted, tying the reins to a sturdy bush. Her fingers, protected by thin gloves, were delicately picking wildflowers as the first snowflakes began to fall. It was then that he heard the sound of approaching horses' hooves. His heart raced at the sight of 3 men from the Blackburn Ranch emerging from the sparse vegetation. The leader of the group, Bill Hawkins, was known for his hostility towards the Cheyenne. Well, Hawkins smiled, but his eyes remained cold. The mayor's fiancée, alone in these parts, dangerous, considering there are savages around. Charlotte straightened her posture, remembering her mother's teachings about maintaining dignity in adverse situations. "Gentlemen, I'm just collecting botanical specimens. If you'll excuse me." "Specimens, is that what they call cattle rustlers' tracks in Boston?" The second man laughed, dismounting. "Maybe we should search your bag. Make sure you're not helping those Indians." The snow began to fall more heavily, and Charlotte realized that her situation was becoming more precarious by the moment. Her hand fumbled for the revolver in her bag, but she knew it would be useless against 3 armed men. "Mayor Henderson wouldn't be pleased to hear that you're harassing his fiancée." She tried to keep her voice steady, even though her heart was pounding uncontrollably. The mayor, Hawkins, spat on the frozen ground. "That fool who would rather protect Indians than defend the interests of the honest men of this town." The wind suddenly increased, bringing with it a curtain of snow that drastically reduced visibility. Charlotte took advantage of the momentary distraction to mount her mare, but the animal, frightened by the sudden storm, bolted. It was at that moment that a different sound cut through the air, a Cheyenne war cry. Like a shadow rising from the storm itself, Thunder Cloud emerged from the white curtain, his black horse imposing against the stormy backdrop. "This woman is under my protection." His voice was deep and clear even through the howling wind. He spoke perfect English, surprising Charlotte. Hawkins and his men instinctively retreated. The presence of the Cheyenne chief, combined with the increasing strength of the storm, seemed to have shaken their earlier bravado. "This isn't over," Hawkins threatened before leaving with his companions, disappearing into the snow that was now falling copiously. "You must come with me." Thundercloud turned to Charlotte. "The storm is just beginning, and your mare doesn't know these paths in winter." Charlotte hesitated, torn between fear of the unknown and the certainty that she wouldn't be able to return to Thunder Valley alone in these conditions. The biting wind and the rapidly accumulating snow left her little choice. "There's a cave not far from here," he continued, holding out his hand toward her. "We'll be safe there until the storm passes." Something in Thundercloud's gaze, the same ancient wisdom she had noticed on their first meeting, made her accept his help. With one fluid movement, he pulled her onto the back of his horse, holding the reins of Charlotte's mare with his other hand. As they rode through the storm, Charlotte found herself pressed against the Cheyenne warrior's broad back, feeling the warmth emanating from him in contrast to the biting cold around them. Her heart was racing, and she couldn't tell if it was because of the danger of the situation or the unexpected closeness of the enigmatic man. The cave appeared as a providential refuge in the now completely white landscape. Thundercloud helped her dismount and led the horses into a natural recess that would protect them from the wind. "You were reckless to go out in this weather," he commented as he skillfully lit a small fire with dry sticks he found at the bottom of the cave. "I didn't realize the storm would come so quickly," Charlotte admitted, trying to control the trembling in her hands. "Thank you for helping me with those men." Thundercloud watched her for a moment, fire dancing in his dark eyes. "There's a lot of hatred in their hearts. They blame my people for their own fears and failures." The flames began to warm the room, and Charlotte allowed herself to relax a little, watching her savior with barely concealed curiosity. His traditional clothes told stories through symbols she didn't understand, and his posture conveyed a natural dignity that none of the men she had met in Boston or Thunder Valley possessed. "We'll have to wait for the storm to pass," he said, taking a seat on the other side of the fire. "Perhaps this is an opportunity for you to learn something about my people beyond the rumors you hear in town." Charlotte realized that she was at the beginning of a journey that would change her life forever. As the snow continued to fall outside, isolating them from the rest of the world, she prepared to discover truths that would challenge everything she had ever believed she knew. The storm roared outside the cave, but inside the warmth of the fire created an almost mystical atmosphere. Charlotte watched in fascination as Thundercloud prepared an infusion of herbs that she had taken from a small leather pouch. "This will help keep the body warm," he explained, offering her a bowl of carved bark. "It's a sacred blend that my people have used for generations." The aroma was unlike any tea Charlotte had ever tasted in Boston. As she took the first sip, she felt a comforting warmth spread through her body, chasing away the chill that still lingered in her bones. "How did you learn English so well?" she asked, curious about the man who had saved her. Thundercloud smiled, slightly, the shadows of the campfire dancing across his weathered face. "I was educated on a mission when I was young. I learned the white man's language to protect my people. Knowledge is power, even if it comes from unexpected places." "Is that why you got the peace agreement with Thunder Valley?" "Peace is a complex word," he replied, adding more wood to the fire. "What your boats call peace is often just submission in disguise. True peace comes from mutual understanding." Charlotte reflected on his words, remembering the tensions she had witnessed in the town. "The men of Blackburn, do they really believe that their people are stealing cattle? They need an enemy to justify their hatred," Thundercloud replied with a wisdom that surprised her. "Winter came early this year. The cows they lost were probably victims of wolves or the cold. But it's easier to blame those who are different." A distant clap of thunder startled Charlotte. Thundercloud got up gracefully and went to check on the horses, returning with his leather bag that had been attached to the saddle. "You collect plants," he commented, having noticed her notebook earlier. "Why, I've always been fascinated by botany," Charlotte replied, feeling more comfortable sharing her passion. "Each plant has unique properties, stories to tell. In Boston, that was considered an eccentric hobby for a lady, but here nature speaks louder than social conventions," Thundercloud added, pulling out a small jar containing a dark paste. "Look at this. The bark of this tree, when prepared correctly, can heal deep wounds. My people have used this knowledge for hundreds of years." For hours while the storm continued outside, Thundercloud shared the secrets of traditional Cheyenne medicine with Charlotte. She eagerly took notes in her notebook, amazed at the depth of knowledge he possessed. "Maxwell, does Mayor Henderson know about this wisdom your people possess?" she asked hesitantly. "Your fiancé sees only what he wishes to see," Thundercloud replied, his piercing gaze meeting hers. "Like many, he confuses progress with the destruction of the old. But there are truths older than your railroads and telegraphs." Charlotte felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. The way Thundercloud spoke, as if he could see through the layers of civilization she carried, disturbed and fascinated her at the same time. "Tell me about your life before the mission," she asked, wanting to divert the conversation away from Maxwell. Thundercloud was silent for a moment, her eyes reflecting the flames. "I was very young when the first settlers arrived. My father was the chief then. He taught me that strength is not just in the bow or the spear, but in the wisdom to know when to fight and when to seek other paths. And that's why you chose peace with Thunder Valley." "I chose the survival of my people," he corrected softly. "But true peace only exists when there is mutual respect. Your fiancé speaks of progress and civilization, but turns a blind eye to the wisdom that already exists in these lands." A meaningful silence settled between them. Charlotte realized that her certainties, carefully built up in Boston, were beginning to crumble like snow in the sun. Thundercloud's presence, his natural dignity and deep knowledge challenged everything she had been taught to believe about Native Americans. "Tomorrow the storm will have passed," he finally said, watching her with an intensity that made her heart race. "You will return to your life in the city, to your fiancé, in your certainties. But remember this night, Charlotte Wilson. Remember that there are more truths in the world than those written in your books." "How can I forget?" she murmured, more to herself than to him. The way he pronounced her name with a reverence she had never heard from Maxwell made her shiver. Thundercloud stood up again, this time returning with a simple but tightly woven blanket. "Sleep," he said gently. "Tomorrow your world will go back to the way it was. Or maybe not." Charlotte curled up in the blanket, feeling the scent of herbs and wood smoke that seemed to be part of it. As she closed her eyes, she was painfully aware of Thundercloud's presence on the other side of the fire, a silent guardian on a night that would change her understanding of the world forever. Outside, the storm was beginning to subside, but inside Charlotte's heart, a new storm was just beginning. Her thoughts wandered between the duty that awaited her in Thunder Valley and the wild freedom that Thundercloud represented. For the first time in her life, she questioned not only her future, but everything she believed she knew about civilization, progress, and above all, love. The blizzard finally subsided at dawn, leaving Thunder Valley covered in a thick white blanket. Charlotte returned to the city, accompanied by Thundercloud, her thoughts as unsettled as the snow that was still gently falling. The night in the cave had changed something fundamental inside her, as if an ancient seed had awakened in her heart. Maxwell was waiting for them at the entrance to the town, his face a mask of barely contained concern and disapproval. Beside him, Warren Blackburn and his men watched the scene with malicious interest. Charlotte Maxwell stepped forward, helping her dismount. His eyes quickly scanned her appearance, looking for signs of anything amiss. "We were extremely worried. I organized a search party, but the storm—" "Thundercloud saved me," Charlotte interrupted him, her voice firm. "He offered me shelter during the storm and brought me safely home." "Saved?" Blackburn scoffed, taking a step forward. "Or kidnapped? How can we be sure of his true intentions?" Thundercloud remained impassive on his black horse, his quiet dignity contrasting with the growing hostility around him. "Miss Wilson was in danger long before the storm," he said calmly, his gaze fixed on Hawkins and his cronies, who stirred uncomfortably. Maxwell frowned, his gaze alternating between Charlotte and Chief Cheyenne. "What does that mean?" "It means that your own citizens pose more danger to your fiancé than my people," Thundercloud replied before turning his horse. "See you soon, Charlotte Wilson." The use of her first name did not go unnoticed by Maxwell, whose fingers tightened possessively on Charlotte's arm. She watched Thundercloud leave, her heart torn between two worlds that seemed increasingly irreconcilable. "Let's go inside," Maxwell ordered softly but firmly. "You need to warm up and rest." At the mayor's house, an imposing building that reflected his position in the city, Charlotte was greeted by the housekeeper with a cup of hot tea. The delicate aroma of Earl Grey seemed strangely artificial after the herbal infusion she had shared with Thundercloud. "I want you to tell me exactly what happened," Maxwell demanded, taking a seat opposite her in the elegantly decorated study. "Every detail." Charlotte hesitated, aware of the power her words could have. "I was collecting plants when a storm hit. Thundercloud found me and offered me shelter in a nearby cave. He was a perfect gentleman, Maxwell." "A gentleman?" he laughed humorlessly. Charlotte dear, I know that your Boston upbringing may have made you naive about the realities of the West, but you must understand that there are certain conventions that need to be respected. Conventions, she repeated, feeling a spark of indignation. Like the convention of allowing men like Hawkins to terrorize innocent people. Maxwell stood up abruptly, walking over to the window. You don't understand the complexities of our situation here. Thunder Valley is at a delicate moment. The agreement with the Cheyenne is fragile, and incidents like this could show that maybe we're wrong about a lot of things, Charlotte added, surprising herself with her boldness. The silence that followed was heavy. Maxwell turned slowly, his blue eyes studying her with a new intensity. You've changed, he finally said. One night with that savage, and he's not a savage, Charlotte protested, standing up. He possesses knowledge we could only dream of having. His traditional medicine, his connection with the earth. Traditional medicine, Maxwell sneered. Charlotte, we have trained doctors, real science. We don't need primitive superstitions. Maxwell's words hit her like a slap. At that moment, she saw clearly the gulf that separated her worldview from his. The hours spent with Thundercloud had opened her eyes to a wisdom deeper than all the books she had studied in Boston. The wedding will be brought forward, Maxwell suddenly declared. We can't risk any more incidents like this. The city needs to see stability, especially now. Maxwell, it's for your own good, Charlotte. He softened his tone, reaching up to touch her face. You're an educated, refined woman. You belong here, helping to bring civilization to Thunder Valley. Don't be enchanted by romantic stories about noble savages. Charlotte recoiled from his touch, feeling suffocated for the first time since arriving in Wyoming. I need a rest, she muttered, heading for the door. Of course, dear, Maxwell agreed, his voice returning to its usual controlled tone. I'll have Mrs. Crawford escort you to the boarding house. And Charlotte, I hope you understand that certain associations need to be avoided from now on. That evening, alone in her room at the boarding house, Charlotte opened her diary. The pages were full of notes about the medicinal plants Thundercloud had shown her, each word a testament to the wisdom Maxwell had so quickly discarded. Through the window, she could see the distant mountains where the Cheyenne people lived. Somewhere in that vastness, Thundercloud would be gazing at the same stars, living a life guided by truths older than the organized streets of Thunder Valley. The distant sound of drums reached her, carried by the night wind. Charlotte closed her eyes, letting the melody penetrate her soul. For the first time in her life, she felt torn not just between two men, but between two completely different worldviews. And in her heart, she knew that the choice she would make would not just be about love, but about who she really wanted to be. The days following the storm brought a subtle but noticeable change to Thunder Valley. The snow slowly melted, revealing secrets buried beneath its white surface, just as Charlotte's certainties began to crumble, exposing truths she could no longer ignore. At school, while teaching the children about American history, Charlotte found herself hesitating in front of the pages of the official textbook. The printed words seemed shallow, now devoid of the depth she had experienced that night in the cave. Ms. Wilson, Sarah Running Deer, one of her Cheyenne students, raised her hand during class. Why does the book say our people were savages? My grandfather knows the stars better than any white man. The silence that followed was heavy. Charlotte looked at the expectant faces of her students, some native, others children of settlers, and realized that she was in a unique position to build bridges between two worlds. Books don't always tell the whole story, Sarah, she replied carefully. Sometimes we call what we don't understand while. After class, Maxwell was waiting for her outside the school. His countenance was more tense than usual, the lines around his mouth more pronounced. We need to talk, he said, offering his arm. There have been worrying developments. They walked to the mayor's office, where Warren Blackburn was already waiting for them. The rancher looked particularly pleased with himself, a smug smile playing on his lips. We found evidence, Blackburn announced as soon as they entered. Cheyenne footprints near where my cows disappeared. And this? He threw a tribal medallion on the table. Charlotte immediately recognized the object. It was similar to one she had seen Thundercloud wearing during her night in the cave. Her heart raced. That doesn't prove anything, she protested. Anyone could have left it there. Charlotte, Maxwell interfered, his voice taking on that condescending tone she was beginning to loathe. I know you've developed a certain sympathy for them, but we need to be realistic. The The evidence is piling up. What evidence? She asked, her voice firmer than she expected. Footprints that could have been made at any time, a medallion that could have been planted. Blackburn stood up abruptly, his face red with anger. Are you calling us liars, miss? I'm suggesting that perhaps we're seeing what we want to see, she replied, holding his gaze. Maxwell put a hand on her shoulder, a gesture that was meant to be comforting, but seemed more like a warning. Darling, you're too emotionally involved in this situation. After that night when thundercloud saved my life, she added. Or are we ignoring the behavior of Hawkins' men as well? A tense silence filled the room. Charlotte could feel the weight of the men's gazes on her, judging her feminine hysteria, as they would surely classify her passionate defense. I'm calling a city council meeting, Maxwell finally announced. We need to resolve this situation before it gets out of hand. In Charlotte, he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Perhaps you'd better concentrate on the wedding preparations. Mrs. Crawford mentioned that you still haven't chosen the fabric for your dress. The casual airing of his concerns ignited something inside Charlotte. She thought back to the hours spent with Thundercloud, how he had treated her as an equal, respecting her opinions and sharing knowledge without condescension. I can't do that, she said softly. What did you say? Maxwell asked, frowning. I can't pretend everything is fine when it clearly isn't, she elaborated, her voice gaining strength. I can't ignore injustices just because it's more convenient. Charlotte, Maxwell warned, think carefully about what you say. Your reputation. My reputation, she laughed humorlessly. What about our reputation as a city, as civilized people who are proud of their peace agreements, but at the first opportunity accuse without proof those they promised to protect? Blackburn let out a sound of contempt. See what happens when you let a woman get too polite, Henderson. She starts to have ideas of her own. Charlotte felt the blood boil in her veins. Yes, Mr. Blackburn, I'm starting to have ideas of my own. Like the idea that maybe the real problem isn't a Cheyenne, but our own inability to see beyond our prejudices. She headed for the door, but Maxwell caught up with her, taking her arm. Where are you going? To do what should have been done from the start, she replied, loosening her grip. I'm in talk to Thundercloud personally. If there are accusations against his people, he deserves the right to defend himself. That's unacceptable, Maxwell exploded. As my future wife. Maybe it's time to reconsider that too, Charlotte interrupted him, surprising herself with the calmness in her voice. She left the office, leaving the two men in shock. On the street, the afternoon sun painted Thunder Valley in shades of gold and red. Charlotte took a deep breath, feeling the weight and freedom of her decision. At the boarding house, she found Mrs. Crawford organizing the kitchen. The older woman looked at her determined face and sighed. You're going to look for him, aren't you? Charlotte nodded, starting to gather her essentials. Be careful, dear, Mrs. Crawford warned gently. Not just with the dangers out there, but with the ones we carry in our hearts. Sometimes the truth we discover is not the one we expected to find. Charlotte paused for a moment, absorbing the older woman's words. The truth I met in that cave was more real than anything I've ever experienced, Mrs. Crawford. I can no longer live pretending that I didn't see it. As she prepared her horse for the journey, Charlotte knew she was crossing a line from which there would be no return. But for the first time since arriving in Thunder Valley, she felt like she was riding toward herself, not away from who she was. The sun was beginning to set as she left the town, her heart beating to the rhythm of her mare's hooves. Ahead of her, the mountains rose like guardians of ancient secrets, and somewhere between them, Thundercloud awaited her, not as a savior or an enemy, but as a man who had awakened in her a truth that could no longer be buried. The sun was setting over the horizon when Charlotte reached Cheyenne territory, painting the sky in shades of red and gold that seemed to reflect the turmoil in her own heart. The Indian camp stood in a sheltered valley, the traditional tents arranged in a circle that spoke of an order and harmony that Thunder Valley had never managed to achieve. Their arrival did not go unnoticed. Cheyenne warriors appeared, silently watching her with a mixture of caution and curiosity. Charlotte recognized the little Cloud, Thundercloud's younger sister, who approached with graceful steps. You are brave to come here alone, Little Cloud said in. Flames of the torches danced violently. Nathan felt his hair stand on end as ancient voices seemed to whisper in the shadows. The spirits are restless, Rosa murmured, her face illuminated by the golden glow of the torches. They know that desecrators are approaching the sacred place. "And what do we do now?" Nathan asked, feeling the weight of the moment on his shoulders. Rosa held out her hand, inviting him to approach the altar. "We need to complete the ritual that my priest began the night he died. He tried to seal this place to prevent its power from falling into the wrong hands. But he didn't have time to finish it." Nathan hesitated only for a moment before taking her hand. Rosa's skin was hot, as if an inner fever was consuming her. "Why me? Why didn't you complete the ritual on your own before?" "Because it takes more than Apache blood to seal the portal," she explained, guiding him into the stone circle. "It takes someone who has known both darkness and light, someone in search of redemption." The voices in the tunnels were closer now. Nathan could make out McCullough's hoarse voice, ordering his men to search every passage. Rosa began to sing, in an ancient language, words that seemed older than the mountains themselves. The air around them became dense, charged with static electricity that made Nathan's hair stand on end. "Give me your hands," she instructed briefly, interrupting her singing. When Nathan obeyed, she pressed the ancient amulet between their joined palms. "Now close your eyes and remember. Remember what? The moment you chose to change. The moment you realized that there was more to life than greed and violence." Nathan closed his eyes, letting the memories flow. He remembered the moment he woke up in Rosa's hut, wounded and vulnerable. The way she had treated him, not as a bandit, but as a man worthy of salvation. The energy in the shrine intensified. Nathan could feel the ancient power coursing through him like an underground river, finally finding its way to the surface. "The spirits are responding," Rosa whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "They recognize your truth, your quest for redemption." A shot exploded at the entrance to the chamber, followed by McCullough's thunderous voice. What a touching scene, the last of the Martinezes and their pet thug trying to steal what is rightfully mine. Nathan opened his eyes to see McCullough and 3 of his men advancing on the camera, guns drawn. The leader of the bandits was exactly as Rosa had described him, tall with a deep scar across his right eye and a smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. "Don't interrupt the ritual," Rosa whispered urgently to Nathan. "No matter what." McCullough laughed, a mirthless sound that echoed off the ancient walls. "Still trying to follow in your father's footsteps, Rosa. He also believed he could control the powers of this place. Look how that ended for him. Mi padre died protecting something sacred from men like you." Rosa replied, her voice firm despite the fear visible in her eyes. "He understood that there is knowledge that shouldn't belong to anyone. Knowledge is power, dear." McCullough advanced, his eyes shining with a feverish light. "And power is all that matters in this world." Nathan felt the amulet between his hands begin to heat up, pulsing like a living heart. The energy in the shrine was changing, the shadows on the walls seeming to take on form and substance. "Last words, Rosa." McCullough raised his revolver, aiming directly at her heart. "Perhaps you'd like to share your father's secrets before you meet him." "The secrets are not mine to share," Rosa replied, her voice taking on a tone Nathan had never heard before, ancient, powerful, as if other voices were speaking through her. "They belong to the earth, to the spirits, to the blood spilled in these sacred tunnels." The amulet between Nathan's hands began to glow with a golden light, and he felt an ancient power flow through his body. The paintings on the walls of the shrine seemed to move, dancing with a life of their own as the ritual reached its climax. McCullough realized too late what was happening. "Shoot," he shouted to his men, but before they could pull the triggers, the true magic of the Superstition Mountains began to reveal itself. The shrine vibrated with ancient energy as the golden light of the amulet intensified between Nathan and Rosa's joined hands. The paintings on the walls seemed to dance with a life of their own, casting shadows that moved like restless spirits in the depths of the mountain. McCullough and his men instinctively stepped back as the ground beneath their feet began to shake. "What have you done?" he roared, his voice betraying a primal fear that contrasted with his usual arrogance. "The spirits have chosen your side," Rosa replied, her voice still carrying that supernatural tone that sent shivers down Nathan's spine. The power that flowed through the amulet now seemed to connect them in a deep and inexplicable way. Nathan felt every beat of his heart synchronize with the pulsations of energy emanating from the artifact. Memories that were not his own began to flow through his mind, ancient rituals, sacred chants, generations of Apache guardians protecting the secrets of the mountain. "Shoot," McCullough ordered again, but when his men pulled the triggers, the bullets simply dissolved into golden dust before they hit the ritual circle. Rosa began to chant louder words in Apache that seemed to make the stones themselves resound in response. Nathan saw the gold veins in the walls glow with increasing intensity, as if the precious metal were awakening from an ancient slumber. "The power you seek, McCullough," Rosa declared, her eyes now glowing with an inner fire, "was not made for men like you. It is part of the earth itself, the blood and bones of my ancestors." "You fool," McCullough stepped forward, ignoring the supernatural power manifesting around him. "Your father also tried to stop me. He also believed he could control these primitive forces. Do you know what I discovered when I killed him? That in the end, everyone bleeds the same color." Nathan felt Rose's anger flow through their shared connection, but there was something else, a deep sadness for the corruption that greed could cause in the human soul. Through her eyes, he finally understood the true meaning of the powers stored in the mountains. "Mi padre died protecting something greater than gold or power," Rosa replied, golden tears streaming down her face. He understood that some forces must remain free, wild as the desert wind. The amulet between her hands began to pulse faster, its glow now so intense that it illuminated the entire chamber. Nathan felt the ancestral power growing inside him, mixing with his own memories of redemption and transformation. The Apache believed, Rosa continued, her voice echoing with the wisdom of generations, that the earth has its own will, that it chooses its guardians, those who respect its mysteries without trying to dominate them. McCullough laughed bitterly, but there was a tremor in his voice. "Always the same Indian stories. Always the same tales about spirits and mystical forces. Do you know what I've learned in all these years of treasure hunting? That real power comes from the barrel of a gun." He raised his revolver again, aiming directly at Rosa's heart. Nathan tried to move to protect her, but she held him firmly in place, her hands still clasped over the pulsating amulet. "No," she whispered to him. "This is how it should be." McCullough's fingers squeezed the trigger, just as the ritual reached its climax. The shot echoed through the chamber like subterranean thunder, but the bullet never reached its destination. Instead, a wave of golden energy exploded from the amulet, expanding in concentric circles that made the walls of the cave groan. Nathan watched, amazed and terrified, as the veins of gold in the walls literally began to move, flowing like rivers of liquid light. McCullough and his men screamed as the precious metal began to snake across the floor towards them, like luminous snakes thirsting for revenge. "Is this what you wanted so badly?" Rosa asked, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. "The true power of the gold of the Superstition Mountains, then take it if you can." The bandit screams echoed through the chamber as the liquid gold reached them, enveloping them in shiny cocoons that quickly solidified. McCullough fought until the last moment, his last words lost in a scream of terror as the precious metal sealed his fate. The silence that followed was deep and sacred. Nathan looked at the golden statues that were once McCullough and his men, their expressions of horror eternalized in the precious metal they coveted so much. "It's over," Rosa muttered, her strength beginning to fail. The shine in her eyes gradually dimmed, returning to the deep brown that Nathan knew so well. He held her as her legs weakened, the amulet now cold and lifeless between them. "What happened to them?" "The land claimed what was rightfully theirs," she replied softly. "They wanted the gold so badly. Now they're part of it forever." Nathan looked at the statues again, feeling a shiver run down his spine. "What happens now? What happens to this place?" Rosa leaned on him, exhausted but serene. "The ritual is complete. The portal is sealed. No one will ever be able to use its powers for evil again." She touched his face gently. "But there is one last duty we must fulfill." "What?" "We need to ensure that these tunnels are never found again, that the secrets of the Superstition Mountains remain buried where they belong." Nathan nodded, finally understanding his role in the whole story. It wasn't just about personal redemption, it was about becoming the guardian of something greater than himself, greater than any material treasure. Together they began the work of sealing the entrances to the shrine, leaving behind the golden statues as an eternal reminder of the price of greed. And in the depths of the earth the Apache spirits sang their ancient songs of protection, pleased with their new guardians. The rising sun found Nathan and Rosa emerging from the depths of the Superstition Mountains, their exhausted silhouettes jagged against the orange Arizona sky. The ritual had left invisible marks on both of them, not just in physical tiredness, but in a profound change that seemed to resonate in their very souls. "How are you feeling?" Nathan asked, watching Rosa as she leaned against a rock to rest. The power that had flowed through her during the ritual seemed to have taken its toll, leaving her pale and trembling. "As if I'd lived 1,000 lives in a single night," she replied, a small smile playing on her lips. "The spirits, they shared much more than I expected. Memories, knowledge, old pains that aren't mine to carry." Nathan nodded understanding. During the ritual, he had also experienced fragments of past lives: Apache warriors, defending sacred lands, healers, performing ancient ceremonies, Rose's own father, discovering the secrets of the mountain. These memories now blended with her own, like paints in a still fresh watercolor. "We need to get back to the hut," Rosa continued, forcing herself to stand. "There are preparations to be made before we can completely seal off the tunnels." "What kind of preparations?" Mi Padre left instructions, documents that need to be preserved but also partly destroyed. "Knowledge needs to be protected, but it can't fall into the wrong hands again." They made their way back in silence, each absorbed in their own thoughts. The surrounding desert seemed different now, more alive, more aware. Nathan could feel the echoes of ancestral power reverberating through the earth like distant music that you only realize when you learn to listen. In the hut, Rosa immediately began sorting through documents and artifacts, organizing them into 2 separate piles. Nathan watched fascinated as she worked with an efficiency born of years of keeping secrets. These, she indicated the smaller pile, are the records that should survive. Coded maps, protection rituals, stories that need to be remembered. The rest. She looked at the larger pile with a mixture of sadness and determination. The rest must become ashes. "Like your father wanted," Nathan added softly. "See?" Rosa ran her fingers through an old diary, its pages yellowed by time. He knew that knowledge is like fire. It can warm and illuminate, but also destroy if left unchecked. While Rosa organized the documents, Nathan kept guard, aware that other bandits might appear attracted by the rumors of gold and power. But something had changed in his posture. He was no longer just an outlaw protecting a treasure, but a guardian defending something sacred. "Do you know what's strangest?" he commented, looking out of the window at the distant mountains. "For the first time in my life, I don't feel like looking for the next big score. It's as if I found something more valuable than gold," Rosa added, understanding perfectly. "The ritual didn't just seal the tunnels, Nathan. It marked us. It chose us." He turned to her, noticing how the sunlight streamed through the dusty windows, creating a golden halo around them. "What for? To be guardians. To keep the secret to the mountains safe, even if that means never being able to live as we did before." The realization of what that meant weighed heavily on them. It wasn't just a question of protecting a place, it was a lifelong commitment, a fundamental change in who they were and what they would become. "What if others like McCullough come?" Nathan asked, his hand instinctively reaching for the revolver in its holster. "They will," Rosa answered with certainty. "Power calls power like water calls thirst. But now we're more than just a healer and a bandit. The spirits have given us tools we haven't even begun to understand." As if to prove her point, she raised her hand and muttered words in Apache. A gentle breeze blew through the hut, carrying with it the scent of herbs and wet earth, a reminder of the power that now coursed through her veins. "I'll need to learn a lot," Nathan admitted, watching in amazement as the breeze made the papers dance gently. "We'll learn together," Rosa corrected, a gentle smile lighting up a tired face. "Apache knowledge is not easy to master, but you have something that many power seekers don't have. What, a heart willing to change. A soul that has chosen redemption over greed." Nathan felt the weight of those words, along with an emotion that had been growing ever since Rosa had saved him days ago. It wasn't just gratitude or admiration, it was something deeper, truer than any feeling he had ever experienced. "What about us?" he asked softly, giving voice to the question that had been hanging between them since the ritual. "What happens now?" Rosa moved closer, gently touching his scarred face. "Now we walk together as the spirits wish. Our history is intertwined with that of the mountains. It couldn't be any other way." The sun was high when they finished organizing the documents. The pile destined for the flames was burned with reverence, its ashes scattered to the wind with ancient words of protection. The documents that survived were carefully stored in a secret place that only the true guardians would know about. "There's one more thing we need to do," Rosa said when they had finished, her expression serious. "We need to return to the tunnels one last time. There is a final sealing ritual that can only be performed when the sun is at its highest." Nathan nodded, understanding that his transformation from outlaw to guardian, from lost man to protector of ancient secrets, was almost complete. The road ahead would be unlike anything he had ever known, but for the first time in his life, he felt he was truly in the right place. "I'm ready," he replied, his voice firm with new determination. Rosa smiled, that smile that had begun to change her world days ago. "Then let's go, me guardian. The mountains await us." The sun was reaching its zenith when Nathan and Rosa returned to the sacred tunnels to perform the final sealing ritual. The air in the depths of the mountain seemed denser, now laden with the weight of centuries of ancient history and magic. The golden statues that were once McCullough and his men stood like silent sentinels, an eternal warning about the price of greed. "The ritual must be performed in the heart of the sanctuary," Rosa explained, her voice echoing softly off the stone walls. "It's where the lines of power meet, where the magic of the earth is strongest." Nathan watched as she prepared the ritual circle, arranging crystals and herbs in specific patterns that seemed to pulsate with a life of their own. The ancestral knowledge they had received during the first ritual still reverberated in their minds like an underground river of wisdom they were only just beginning to understand. The Apache believed, Rosa continued, lighting candles made from wild beeswax, that each generation of guardians left their mark on the mountains, an imprint of their souls that became part of the land itself. "Is that why we can feel their memories?" Nathan asked, touching the old paintings on the walls that now seemed to vibrate under his fingers. "As if they were part of us, see? The ritual didn't just choose us as guardians, it connected us with everyone who came before." Rosa stopped her work, looking deeply into Nathan's eyes. "It's an endless circle like the seasons. Each guardian adds their own story to the fabric of the mountain." Nathan felt the weight of that responsibility settle more deeply on his shoulders. It wasn't just a question of protecting a place, it was becoming part of something much bigger than themselves, a tradition that stretched back through the centuries like the very roots of the mountains. "What will happen when we complete the ritual?" he asked, watching Rosa arrange the last crystal in the circle. "The main tunnels will be sealed off, accessible only to those who bear the mark of the guardians," she explained, removing the Apache amulet from her bag. "But more than that, our lives will change forever. The power granted to us, it demands a price." "What kind of price?" Rosa hesitated, her dark eyes reflecting the candlelight. "We will be bound to these lands, Nathan, not just out of duty, but out of necessity. The guardians can't stray too far from the mountains without feeling their strength diminish. It's a life of service, of total dedication." Nathan processed this information, thinking about how drastically his life had changed in just a few days. From an aimless outlaw, he had become part of something sacred and eternal. The thought should have frightened him, but instead it brought a sense of peace he had never known. "I'm ready," he said, simply holding out his hands to her. Rosa smiled, that smile that had begun to change his world from day one. Together, they entered the ritual circle, the amulet pulsing between their joined hands like a living heart. The chanting began softly, ancient Apache words flowing from Rosa's lips like water from a crystal-clear spring. Nathan joined in instinctively, the ancestral knowledge guiding his voice into a perfect harmony that made the stones themselves vibrate in response. The energy began to grow around them, more intense than the first time. The gold veins in the walls shone like rivers of liquid light, pulsating to the rhythm of his singing. Nathan could feel the power flowing through him, no longer as an external force, but as a natural part of his being. "The spirits are responding," Rosa whispered between the words of the chant. They recognize our union, our dedication to the path of the Guardians. The memories began to flow more intensely, generations of Apache performing sacred rituals, healers, sharing ancestral knowledge, warriors, defending the mountains from invaders. Each memory became part of them, weaving their souls deeper into the mystical fabric of the place. The amulet between his hands glowed brighter and brighter, its golden light filling the entire chamber. Nathan felt something transform inside him, as if every drop of blood in his veins was being rewritten with ancient magic, every beat of his heart synchronizing with the pulse of the mountain itself. "It is time," Rosa announced, her voice carrying the power of hundreds of guardians before her. "The final sealing must be done with blood and love, the two most powerful elements we know." She produced a small ritual knife, its blade decorated with Apache symbols. With one smooth movement, she made a small cut in the palm of her hand, then in Nathan's hand. When their bleeding hands joined over, the amulet power exploded around them like a storm of golden light. The walls of the shrine shook not violently, but with divine purpose. Nathan watched in amazement as the tunnels began to transform, some passages closing completely, others reconfiguring themselves into labyrinths that only true guardians could navigate. "It's done," Rosa murmured as the power began to wane, her hands still entwined with Nathan's. "The secrets of the Superstition Mountains are safe once again." Nathan pulled her close, feeling how their hearts beat in perfect sync. "What about us? What happens now?" "Now we begin our true journey," she replied, touching his face gently. "As guardians, as partners, as souls chosen by the spirits to protect something sacred." The shrine seemed to breathe around them, like a living being content with its choices. The candles flickered softly, casting dancing shadows on the walls that now held not only old stories, but also the beginning of a new one. "I never thought I'd find a purpose like this," Nathan confessed, his eyes reflecting the golden glow that still hung in the air, "let alone someone to share it with." Rosa smiled, that smile that had started it all, that had shown a wounded bandit the way to redemption. "The spirits always knew me more. They just waited for the right moment to unite us." Together they began the journey back to the surface, leaving behind the transformed sanctuary. But now they carried their magic within them, in hearts that beat as one, in souls marked by ancestral power, and in a love that had been born between the shadows of the Superstition Mountains. The months that followed the sealing ritual brought profound changes, not only for Nathan and Rosa, but for the entire region of the Superstition Mountains. Stories about the events in the underground sanctuary spread like wildfire through the territory, blending with ancient Apache legends until reality and myth became indistinguishable. Rosa's cabin, once a solitary refuge, became a center of healing and wisdom. People came from far and wide seeking not only traditional remedies, but also glimpses of the mysterious power that now emanated from the place. Nathan watched with admiration as Rosa balanced a role as healer with her new responsibilities as guardian, never revealing the true secrets of the mountains, but always offering help to those who really needed it. "It's strange," he commented one afternoon as they watched the sunset from the newly built balcony. "I've spent so long looking for riches, and now I'm holding the greatest treasure of all, without being able to tell anyone." Rosa smiled, her hands busy with a new protective amulet she was weaving. "The real treasure was never gold, mi amor. It was knowledge, the connection to something greater than ourselves." Nathan nodded, feeling the ancestral power pulsing through him like second nature. Over the last few months, he had learned to control the abilities granted by the ritual, the ability to sense disturbances in the earth, to communicate with the spirits of the mountains, to heal minor injuries with a touch. But more importantly, he had learned to find peace in his new purpose. "We had another visitor today." Rosa continued, her expression more serious. "A man looking for information about McCullough and his men. He said he was a bounty hunter." "And what did you tell him?" "The same story we told everyone, that McCullough and his gang disappeared into the mountains, probably victims of their own greed." She paused, her fingers unconsciously tracing the scar on his neck. "But there's something else. The spirits are restless again." Nathan straightened up, instantly alert. During his patrols of sacred territory, he had learned to trust the subtle warnings that the earth sent through its mystical connection. "What kind of disquiet changes are coming?" Rosa replied, her eyes fixed on the distant mountains. "The world outside is changing rapidly. Railroads, telegraphs, new cities springing up where before there was only desert. Soon places like this will become rarer and rarer. Then we need to prepare," Nathan concluded, understanding the concern in his voice. "Find a way to protect the secrets even when civilization gets here." Rosa nodded, getting up to go into the hut. She returned moments later with an aged leather package, the last documents saved from the shrine. Mi padre foresaw this. In his last writings, he talked about the need to adapt the old ways to the new times. Together they examined the documents in the twilight. Nathan had learned to read Spanish in recent months, guided by Rosa's patience and the need to understand the sacred texts. Her father's words seemed more relevant than ever. The secrets of the mountains must survive, not only in rituals and shrines, but in the hearts of those who choose to protect them. True power lies not in gold or magic, but in the wisdom to know when to change and when to stand firm. He was right, Rosa murmured, carefully closing the diary. We need to find others, people with the right heart, to become guardians when our time comes to leave. Nathan pulled her close, feeling how their hearts beat in perfect sync, one of the many gifts the ritual had granted them. "We'll start tomorrow. There's that young Apache woman who came last week, the one who could see spirits. And the blacksmith from the new town," Rosa added, a smile forming on her lips. "The one who dreams of the mountains, even though he's never been here." The sun finally disappeared behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold reminiscent of the glow of the holy shrine. Nathan thought about how his life had changed completely since that fateful day when he was found bleeding in the desert. From a man with no purpose beyond the next robbery, he had become part of something eternal and sacred. "Do you know what's most incredible?" he asked, watching the first stars appear in the sky. "For the first time in my life, I don't miss the old thrill of the trails. It's like I found something I've always been looking for without knowing it." Rosa touched his face, gently, her fingers tracing the scars that told stories of his past. "The spirits have always known your destiny, Nathan Drake. You just had to be ready to accept it." The night wind blew across the valley, carrying with it the ancient whispers of the mountains. Somewhere in the depths of the earth, the sealed sanctuary continued its eternal vigil, its golden chambers guarding not only material treasures, but also the promise that some secrets are too important to lose. Nathan and Rosa stayed out on the balcony late into the night, planning for the future, while the stars slowly rotated in the sky above. They were more than just a former outlaw and a healer. Now, they were guardians of an ancestral legacy, protectors of mysteries that transcended time and space. And in the Superstition Mountains, where legend and reality intertwined like the very veins of gold in the rocks, their story would continue to be told in whispers around campfires, a reminder that true power lies not in what you can possess, but in what you choose to protect.